Hello, Hans Morten Skivik. Hello, the audience of ODNE. We're here today for another video of People of Gestalt in OD, presented by ODNE Europe. We're really pleased to have you here, Hans Morten.
It's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll start with a short introduction of Hans Morten. Before we go on the main interview. So Hans Morten Skivik has a master's degree in political science, in pedagogy, and is a trained psychotherapist. In addition to this, he has a master's degree in both complexity, conflict management, and negotiation. He has 20 years of consulting experience and over 5 years of management experience from both the public and private sectors. In recent years, he has published several books in relevant subject areas. Hans Morten's core competence is conflict prevention and handling, as well as change management. He works primarily with leadership development, leadership group development, and advising leaders at a high level. He is also a sought-after speaker. Those who collaborate with Hans Morten appreciate his professionally based approach with his humorous approach, and I can vouch for that. As a facilitator, he's close. Hans Morten dares to challenge at the same time as he safeguards the individual's integrity. It's a real pleasure to have you, Hans Morten. You work in Oslo at the AFF Institute. Really good to see another lens of OD in Europe.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Well, I think it's most important to say I'm a quite simple boy from a small Norwegian village. I think that's the most cover of it.
And who has accomplished quite a lot of things in the OD world, both locally but also internationally. You have an impressive experience as a consultant from a very young age. What drove you to the Gestalt training in the first place?
Well, that's partly a professional question, but it's partly also a quite personal question. So I started working with leadership development as a quite young man, like I think I was around 29 years old. And then I had a colleague who was trained a Gestalt therapist. So that was kind of my first meeting with it. I had another colleague who was on training while we were working together. But a really important meeting with the Gestalt as an approach was because I had kind of a personal crisis. And there was a long waiting list to get into the official system to have a psychologist. So I was so lucky to have a very good Gestalt therapist. And by experience, I thought that this would be a very useful way for me. And I could, in the one hand, I would be interested at that time to also go into the therapist framework, but I also saw it that it would be a very useful tools into my leadership development, understanding groups, understanding people, and giving me another framework that I had from the more classical point of view from the university.
And how compatible would you say it's the Gestalt approach with a more traditional leadership and change management approach?
Well, it's I think it's kind of partly two different worlds, but it's very easy when you are in the traditional understanding of leadership and organization to be captured of the linear models. And also thinking that leadership is about the leader, is something inside the leader. While going into the Gestalt area, you understand more of the complexity and you understand more of relationships as circular and also that things are in between people. So I think it's different kind of glasses to look into the reality, and both glasses is useful. I think due to my training, it was a 4-year training. I got lots of training, so that is also useful, of course, because you are never as good as you can be in this kind of area. So the amount of training was also a great thing to bring into my field.
Can hear that. And of course, you have worked in very high profile conflict resolution cases in Norway. In your book, you explain your model of conflict resolution. Could you tell us something more about the model and how much does it draw from Gestalt or not?
I think one of the things that I was quite fascinated of quite early on due to conflicts is how they seems to be reproducing themselves. That is, the organization came back to almost the same kind of conflicts over and over again, and also individuals. I mean, privately, but also in a professional role, it's kind of the same conflicts going on. And even if you solve a conflict, I mean, there is no necessity that you learn from it. So the thing I was quite concerned of was the one part is to solve the conflict, if possible, of course, but the second part is to learn of it. So you don't reproduce the conflicts over and over again. To build kind of a platform to solve the same conflicts better next time. And the third level is kind of looking into the culture. How can a company build a culture who can have constructive conflict culture? So my model is really based on 3 levels. The one level is solving the conflict, and the second level is learn from it, and the third level is building constructive culture around conflicts in organizations. So as you know, there is no zone who is conflict free. I mean, every place people are meeting, there is possibility for conflicts. And also there's lots of constructive parts of conflict. If you need new ideas, if you want to make a change, if you want to implement a strategy, you need friction. The problem is when this friction becomes personal. So really learning to handle conflict in a constructive way, then conflict is also very valuable.
It does make quite a lot of sense to me. And to continue on your area of expertise, you've worked internationally. How would you say is conflict perceived differently in different countries and cultures?
I think you can also look into one country and see difference between parts of the country. Like Norway, we have the north of Norway. It's totally different culture-wise than south of Norway. And I think building awareness on these differences, so that differences doesn't become the problem itself, it's quite important. You know, being a Norwegian, we are well known to be quite conflict avoidant. The American have this wonderful wording as talking about the Norwegian personal disorder. And then they are talking about a person who's really conflict avoidant and can't get into the circle of the real conflict. But if you go south in Europe, it's totally different. So really to get aware of these differences and don't make that the main problem, but make the issue the problem, I think that's an important part of it.
And do you use any of Gestalt when working with conflicts?
I would say yes. In one hand, it's kind of a set of beliefs. But also technically, when we go into to work with the parties to solve the problem, I mean, we use lots of methods and insights from the Gestalt area. Yes, definitely.
How does Gestalt support you in your work of conflict resolution?
Yeah, so I think one main part of the Gestalt is really to believe in the dialogue and making the dialogue happening. I think the other really important part of Gestalt is working here and now. To really take the problem into the here and now and talk with the parties. How is the conflict in this room here and now? And how can we solve it here and now? And what do we have to talk about here and now? The Gestalt helps me to handle complexity. Of course, having a training as a psychotherapist, it also is very helpful of handling emotions, and conflicts are filled up with different difficult emotions. So I think that's three important parts. And now I will get back to the most important part. I just have to find the English word first. It's forsoning, reconciliation, isn't that? Okay. But then I think the most important part of the Gestalt, it's kind of the red thread in Gestalt, is the reconciliation. So it's reconciliation with yourself, it's reconciliation with your history, it's reconciliation with other people. So I think the reconciliation, it's also a very, very important part, if possible, with conflicts. So also that is a very, very important part from the Gestalt theory and practice.
And I've had the chance to see you work several times. You sometimes use metaphors in your work and images as well.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean that's we are really using it early on in the conflict, where I can ask a person, if I interview them up front, if you should describe this conflict as a metaphor, what kind of a metaphor would you like to use then? And very often, when you are in the middle of a conflict, it's not really easy to understand what you are in the middle of, but it's very helpful to put a metaphor on it. Like, talk about like it's a war, it's a cancer, it's just about winning. So the good thing is when we're using the metaphors, when the parties meeting in a room, it's a very, very strong experience to see those metaphors put on the wall as pictures. And when you're working with a conflict, you're always trying to help the parties to find this point, the major point where people are willing to start to solve the problem instead of fighting on. And sometimes when they see the metaphors, they would see, yes, this is too much. Let's start on stepping this down again. And find a solution. So metaphors is very helpful, and the good thing with metaphors is you can put lots of projections into it.
Yeah, I'm thinking that about the sentence you said earlier, that it's a way of being. The Gestalt is a way of being, and you certainly transpire, you certainly show your Gestaltness while you work, although it might not be labeled as Gestalt.
Yeah.
And metaphors
Absolutely.
are one example of it.
Yeah.
Among other things, you're also the program director of the Soulstrong Program. For those of you who are not based in the Scandinavian countries, it's one of the oldest high-profile leadership programs in Norway. Could you tell us something more about the program and how much of Gestalt is present in the program nowadays?
Well, the Soulstrong Program is an executive level program for people in position. So we need to have a executive position to attend the program. So it's very experienced leaders meeting up. It's a 7-week-long program shared into 4 different modules. And we are meeting up to 2 weeks at a time. The program was started after the Second World War. So it was a part of building competence, leadership competence into the country. And it's been going on now for so many decades, and it's still relevant. People are working with their own kind of personal development in their role, but also the contextual part of it and the organization they also are representing. Gestalt was a very, very strong framework and and lots of the process work was based on Gestalt in the 70s and 80s, especially. Today we are more eclectical, so we kind of get process tools from different areas, but you can still see the Gestalt as a part of it. Working here and now, modeling the problem, going deep in and look at yourself from the outside.
Thanks for explaining the program. And how do leaders respond to a Gestalt approach? Leaders from such a high profile.
Normally they would not know it's a Gestalt approach because we will not frame what we're doing. But we of course using the Gestalt approach into the groups. But I also use lots of Gestalt approach when I work with top management teams. And for some of them, it's a bit different. It can be a bit out of the comfort zone, but it's also very, very valuable. So I kind of have the impression that people are enjoying it and liker det. They enjoying it and setter pris på det. Appreciate it.
It's some questions we're asking other speakers as well. Could you tell us a little story of your work as a consultant and the use of the Gestalt approach?
Well, this could seem like a very small thing, but you know, I don't know if you experience to feel really stupid sometimes.
Very often.
And how embarrassing that could be. So I'm sitting with an executive vice president and with her vice president, and they have kind of a conflict going on between them. And this is the first meeting, and I'm starting to help them to listening and talk to each other, and I don't understand a clue of what they're talking about. I cannot understand every word, so it's no problem with the wording, but I don't understand what are they trying to say, so I feel really stupid. So I'm sitting there and feeling stupid, and I'm feeling smaller and smaller and more stupid, and maybe a part of it I'm trying to just act as I'm professional and I'm on the stage and I understand everything. But then kind of going into the Gestalt world, I have this reminding of, maybe it's the field. It's not maybe only me. It could be like it's something happening in between us. And it took some courage just to stop them and to say, well, I'm sorry, I can't follow you anymore. I don't understand anything of what you're saying. But that's okay. As long as you understand each other, it's fine with me. But I just want to check out with you. Can you understand what's going on here? And then both of them look at me and say, no, I can't understand anything either. So then we just jumped back to start and did it over again. So I think that's a very small example on using the field theory in praxis.
Thank you. It's a really good example, very rich.
Yeah, and I just have to say, it took some courage to tell them I feel so stupid now.
I can definitely recognize that, and I can say that years of Gestalt training do build resilience with ourselves to be able to say it.
I also think that if you go back to the Gestalt literature, you will find this label of state the obvious. And that was the obvious thing that was going on. Yeah.
Thank you. We're at the end of our interview.
Okay.
I would like to.
It was a pleasure of joining you.
And I hope to see you again in one of our videos.
Okay, that would be a pleasure.